No band cover, no name, just five shadows staring from a dark photo. That's how the Rolling Stones released their first album, and within 1 week, it knocked the Beatles off the top spot. It wasn't just a debut, it was a declaration of war. Raw, defiant, and driven by blues, this album wasn't designed to please, it was designed to provoke. 60 years later, we're looking back at the birth of a legend and the scandal, rebellion, and rivalry that came with it. This is the story behind the first Rolling Stones album and the moment rock and roll split in two. April 16th, 1964. The UK music scene is exploding, dominated by polished smiles and matching suits. At the top of it all, the Beatles. But that day, something very different hits the shelves, a debut album with no title, no name, and no explanation. Just a moody black and white photo of five young men, no smiles, no charm, just attitude. This was the first album by the Rolling Stones. It didn't ask for your attention, it demanded it. The minimalist cover wasn't a mistake, it was a statement. The Stones weren't here to play by the rules of pop. They were here to break them. And the reaction? Instant chaos. In just 1 week, the album sold over 100,000 copies, a shocking number for a group that had barely touched mainstream radio. But the real bomb dropped when they dethroned the Beatles from #1, ending a nearly year-long reign. It wasn't just a commercial win, it was symbolic. The nice boys from Liverpool had just been shoved aside by five snarling blues addicts from London. What made it more remarkable was how raw the album sounded. No polish, no perfection, just energy, urgency, and rebellion. At a time when most albums were carefully crafted to be clean and catchy, this one felt like it was recorded live, in a smoky club with one mic and no rules. The track list was mostly covers Chuck Berry, Willie Dixon, Muddy Waters, but played with a grit and tension that was uniquely theirs. It was white boys playing black music, but without apology or imitation. They weren't copying, they were channeling. The album wasn't just different, it was dangerous, and that's exactly what made it irresistible. This wasn't a band introducing themselves, it was a band kicking down the door. It all started with a record under someone's arm. In 1961, at the Dartford train station, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards ran into each other by chance. They'd known each other as kids, but hadn't spoken in years. What pulled them back together? A couple of blues albums, Chuck Berry and Muddy Waters, that Jagger was carrying like sacred relics. That moment wasn't just nostalgia, it was ignition. Two teenagers obsessed with American rhythm and blues, reconnecting not over school or memories, but over music that most people around them didn't even understand. From that unlikely meeting came something powerful. They started jamming, writing, and dreaming, and slowly, the pieces came together. They brought in Brian Jones, a multi-instrumentalist obsessed with the blues. Then Charlie Watts, a quiet jazz drummer who gave the band its heartbeat. Finally, Bill Wyman, steady and strange, completed the lineup. This wasn't a group formed by industry execs. It was raw chemistry. Friends, freaks, and fanatics of American blues building something British, dirty, and new. They weren't chasing fame. They were chasing sound. Their early rehearsals were chaotic, loud, and full of arguments. But out of that noise came a bond, especially between Jagger and Richards. They had different personalities, but the same hunger. They didn't want to just cover blues songs, they wanted to live them. That energy quickly spilled into London's club scene, where the Stones gained a reputation for being wild, aggressive, and unpredictable. They didn't dress clean, they didn't smile, and they didn't care. What started with a chance encounter at a train station became a musical alliance that would last decades. It wasn't destiny, it was obsession. And from the very beginning, the Rolling Stones were already out of step and proud of it. He wasn't a musician and he didn't play guitar, but he turned the Rolling Stones into a weapon. Andrew Loog Oldham was only 19 when he discovered the band, and almost instantly, he saw what they couldn't. They weren't clean, they weren't polished, and that was their power. Oldham didn't want another Beatles. He wanted the opposite, a group that scared parents, thrilled teenagers, and looked like they didn't care whether you liked them or not. He pushed the image hard. Messy hair, rude answers, and no forced charm. If the Beatles were your girlfriend's favorite band, the Stones were the ones she'd never tell her parents about. Oldham made brutal decisions. He kicked out Ian Stewart, the band's original pianist, because he didn't fit the look. He staged controversies. He wrote fake press releases. He made sure the Stones were always in the headlines, even if it meant bending the truth. More than a manager, he was an architect. He didn't just shape their sound, he shaped their mythology. And part of that strategy was friction, especially with the Beatles. He pushed comparisons, planted stories, and built a public rivalry that guaranteed attention. Would you let your daughter marry a Rolling Stone? That wasn't a complaint, that was marketing, and it worked. Under Oldham, the band didn't just gain popularity, they gained danger. And in the world of rock and roll, that was priceless. They didn't want perfection, they wanted urgency. The Rolling Stones recorded their debut album in just 5 sessions, between January and February of 1964. There were no orchestras, no overdubs, and no second takes unless absolutely necessary. It was raw, fast, and loud, exactly how they sounded on stage. While other bands polished every note, the Stones wanted the record to feel like a live gig caught on tape. You could almost hear the sweat. The room buzzed with electricity. Mistakes stayed in. Energy mattered more than accuracy. But it wasn't just the music that caused a stir. During a live appearance at the BBC, the band's attitude clashed hard with the conservative tone of the station. Their appearance was unkempt, their sound aggressive, and their behavior borderline disrespectful, at least by BBC standards. Producers were furious, viewers complained, and headlines followed, which for Oldham and the Stones meant success. Every scandal boosted sales, every complaint added to the myth. The band wasn't just selling songs, they were selling rebellion. The album itself reflected that same spirit. Most of the tracks were covers Muddy Waters, Chuck Berry, Willie Dixon, but delivered with a kind of swagger that made them sound brand new. The Stones weren't trying to be pop stars, they were trying to be outlaws with amplifiers. And tucked into that track list was something even more important. Tell Me, the very first Jagger, Richards composition. It was raw, emotional, and uneven, but it marked the birth of one of the most powerful songwriting duos in music history. They didn't just record an album, they captured a threat. It wasn't just a chart victory, it was a cultural shift. When the Rolling Stones' debut album hit #1 in April 1964, it did something no one thought possible. It ended the Beatles' near year-long dominance of the UK charts. That wasn't a coincidence, it was a strategy. Andrew Loog Oldham had carefully positioned the Stones as the anti-Beatles. Where Lennon and McCartney smiled for cameras, Jagger and Richards smirked. Where the Beatles wore matching suits, the Stones wore whatever they felt like. If the Beatles were harmony, the Stones were tension. But the rivalry wasn't just public, it was personal and complicated. Behind the scenes, there was mutual respect and even friendship. The Beatles helped the Stones get signed early on. Lennon and McCartney even gave them a song, I Want to Be Your Man, to help boost their early career. Still, Oldham knew the press loved conflict, so he fed the flames. He wanted fans to choose sides, and it worked. You were either with the clean-cut Beatles or the dangerous Stones, no middle ground. When the Stones took the #1 spot, it was more than a sales number. It was a declaration. Rock and roll no longer belonged to smiles and suits. It belonged to sweat, sneers, and sound that made your parents nervous. That rivalry, real or imagined, would define an entire era of music. And it all began with one dark photo, one loud album, and a band that wasn't afraid to be hated. It began with 5 kids, 1 blues record, and a photo too dark to show their names. 60 years later, the Rolling Stones aren't just a band, they're a living monument. From Paint It Black to Sympathy for the Devil, from Gimme Shelter to Start Me Up, they've delivered the soundtrack of rebellion, heartbreak, and chaos for over 6 decades. 30 studio albums, over 2,000 live shows, more than 200 million records sold. They've been inducted into every Hall of Fame that matters. They've topped charts on every continent. And in 2023, they became the only band in history to release new music in 7 different decades. They survived the British invasion, the psychedelic era, punk, disco, grunge, streaming, and still sell out stadiums. They've been banned, blamed, worshipped, mocked, and imitated, but never outlived. And it all started with one raw album and a sound that didn't ask for your approval, it took it. Now it's your turn. What do the Rolling Stones mean to you? The riffs? The controversy? The fact that they're still standing when so many have faded? Tell us in the comments, are they the greatest rock band ever, or simply the last one left?